I'll admit, chummers, when I first heard about Shadowrun Anarchy, a narrative-based Shadowrun game that was also Rules Lite, I wasn't exactly keen on the idea. I don't normally like Rules Lite games, since they generally only have one particular rule, and that makes all the abilities feel the same. And narrative games are not really much of games, if you ask me. I'm pleased to announce, though, that Shadowrun Anarchy doesn't really fit either of those expectations. The core mechanics for Anarchy are definitely a stripped-down version of Shadowrun 5th editions. Anarchy uses 6-sided dice, and you form a dice pool based on the rating of one of your skills and a relevant attribute, such as electronics and logic if you were trying to fix a broken computer. You then roll your dice and count up how many are 5s and 6s. These 5s and 6s count as successes, and you want as many of them as possible. For those of you already familiar with 5th edition, that's where the similarities between the two end though. There's no extended rolls and no limits on rolls. You're also always rolling against another dice pool, either one put together by another character or a set number of dice decided upon by the GM. Whoever gets more successes, well, succeeds. To bring it all together, if you had an electronics rating of 4 and a logic of 6, you would be rolling 10 dice. The GM would then decide how difficult it is to repair this computer, 6 being the amount of dice they'd roll for an average task, 4 if it's particularly easy, or 8 if it's somewhat difficult. If you roll more successes than the GM, you fix the computer, otherwise it stays broken. Combat is also wildly simplified. Attacking is agility and the relevant combat skill, while the defender is using their agility and logic to avoid taking damage. Again, whoever rolls higher succeeds. Instead of rolling for damage though, all weapons deal damage equal to your net successes plus your weapon damage. Damage is always applied to the defender's armor first, regardless of the damage type. After their armor runs out, they then take damage to either their physical or stun damage track. Much like in 5th edition, taking damage on either track causes penalties to every roll made until those wounds are healed. It doesn't do much to know the basic rules if you don't have a character, so let's go over that next. First, the level of the game needs to be determined, since this determines how much of everything your character gains. I'm going to proceed with the Street Runner level, which is kind of the middle ground power level of the game. After that, you choose your character's meta type. For those of you more familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, this is your character's race: human, elf, dwarf, orc, or troll. Each meta type has their own advantages, namely in what attributes they gain bonuses to, and what their maximums for those attributes are. After you decide your meta type, you then get to divide up your attribute points. Every attribute starts at 1, but can be raised by 1 for every point you spend to that attribute. So if I were playing as a dwarf and I wanted to raise my strength to 6, I would need to spend 4 points, since I start with 1 and gain another for choosing dwarf. After you assign your attributes, you then calculate your stun and physical damage tracks. Your physical track is half of your strength plus 8. Your stun track is half of your willpower plus 8. When you have those numbers, that's how many boxes you get on either track. So our 6 strength dwarf would have 11 boxes in their physical track. Once you have your attributes assigned and the length of your stun and physical tracks, the next step is to pick your character's skills. In a Street Runner game, you get 12 points to assign to skills. Regardless of the level of the game, you're not allowed to have any more than 5 different skills. The list is fairly short though. It takes up less than a single page in the book on page 32. Shadow Amps come next, and while it's kind of brief, this is one of the more involved parts of the game, since these can be built from scratch. I'm not going to go into the details of creating Shadow Amps. The rules on that, much like the skills though, are only a page or 2 long. There's a list of some pre-made Shadow Amps if you don't feel like going through the creation process. That list starts on page 202. Additionally, you need to spend 2 points from your Shadow Amps to be a mage or a technomancer. Any Shadow Amp points that you don't spend get converted into the attribute Edge, which can be used for various effects during the course of the game. Once you have all your Shadow Amps taken care of, you then pick 2 positive qualities and 1 negative one. You can choose some from the list on page 204, or make them up, with the rule of thumb being that a positive quality will give you a 2 dice bonus to a particular situation, while a negative quality gives you a 2 dice penalty. The last step, at least mechanically, is to determine what equipment your character has. Their armor, what weapons they use, and some pieces of equipment they would carry. Armor comes in 3 types: light, medium, and heavy. Medium armor is the standard, granting 9 points of armor. Light armor grants 6 points, and choosing to go with a lighter set of armor grants you an additional skill point. Heavy armor is the opposite of light. It gives you 12 points of armor, but you lose a skill point for choosing it. Weapons are listed on page 206. For a Street Runner game, you pick 1 ranged weapon and 1 melee weapon. Like many lists in this game, this one is no longer than a page. After that, and picking out a few pieces of equipment, you're pretty much done with your character. As I've described earlier, this is a narrative-based game. It's not enough just to have stats on a sheet and to know how to roll the dice. There's a lot of aspects about creating characters for and playing this game that I feel need to be addressed before somebody can really get what Shadowrun Anarchy is about. First and foremost, let's look at what shows up on the character sheet. We have dispositions and cues. Dispositions are phrases that kind of describe how your character would react in certain situations, or certain things that they're proud of or have accomplished. Cues, on the other hand, are phrases your character would actually say, one-liners. While technically any game could include these sort of details on a character sheet, they're especially important to include in a narrative game. Moving away from the character sheet though, there's also plot points. Each player starts the game with 3, while the GM starts with 1. Plot points are spent towards various effects, listed on page 36. Like many of the rules so far, I'm not going to cover all this, but the one I definitely want to bring up is the effect Live Dangerously, which adds what is referred to as a glitch die to any roll being made. The glitch die is a die that you add to your dice pool that's somehow different from all your other dice, be it in color or size. This die doesn't add any successes to your roll, but it otherwise can complicate things, either for better or worse. Should the glitch die come up as a 1, something bad happens that otherwise complicates matters. This doesn't negate a successful roll, rather you succeed but at some cost, like successfully repairing a slagged cyberdeck, but running out of solder to fix the next one. If it comes up as a 5 or a 6, something good happens, making a good situation better if you succeed, or proving that every cloud does have a silver lining if you fail, such as being able to recover some useful data from your cyberdeck even though you're not able to fix it. Back to plot points though. Players earn them by good role-playing, either by playing up their character's dispositions or generally being entertaining. There's also a few shadow amps that grant an extra plot point during combat scenarios. However, anytime a player uses a plot point, it gets added to the GM's pool of plot points. So as the players use them, the GM gets more they can use themselves. What I think is the most vital part of Shadowrun Anarchy's identity is what the game calls narrations. Narrations in Shadowrun Anarchy are what most other games might call a scene or an encounter. And by suggestion of the rules, everybody takes turns leading narrations, starting with the GM who sets up the initial scene of the game. Then it moves on to the player to the GM's left or right and continues on in a circle. Whoever is leading a narration, more or less, has complete control of what goes on. They decide what their character does and what happens next. And when they've gone on long enough, they pass it on to the next player, who continues the story in their narration. Of course, the players can't dictate what another player character is doing, even if they control the narration, nor should they also dictate what an important NPC says or does. That's up to the GM. Though the leader of a narration can decide who shows up, leaving whoever owns that character to decide how they justify why they're now in that scene. This also means that one of the GM's responsibilities is to make sure that things move smoothly and interesting. Things like moving on to the next narration if one player drags on too long, or interjecting if the players are making things too easy for themselves. The chapter Anarchy in 5th edition is what really piqued my interest. This chapter is a guide for converting things between the 2 versions of the game. I won't cover specifics, but the grand scheme looks like this. Anything from the 5th edition books can be converted to Anarchy. You take out or simplify a few things, and they're ready to go. It's kind of like saving a huge image into a smaller resolution. You keep the same general picture, but lose a little bit of details and data. Going from Anarchy to 5th edition, though, presents some problems. mostly since things like qualities are just descriptors in Anarchy, but they have much more specific effects in 5th edition. There is also a few more stats in 5th edition that aren't present in Anarchy. So to continue with the image analogy, converting from Anarchy to 5th edition is like if you take a small image and resize it to a higher resolution. Data has to be extrapolated to fill in the gaps, and it might not look like how it was meant to. The bottom line is this though, while the two are somewhat compatible, one isn't necessarily a replacement for the other. The Shadowrun Anarchy rulebook is a very slim one. It's about 200 pages long. Most of that is setting information, pre-made characters, and scenarios and the like. There's honestly not too many rules that you need to concern yourself with. So, if you were wanting to play Shadowrun, but you don't really have the time to dedicate to it, or the 5th edition rules seem a little daunting or overcomplicated, Shadowrun Anarchy may be just for you, chummer. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting or informative, give me one of those thumbs up. If you're interested in hearing more about Shadowrun in general, go ahead and check out a few of my other videos about 5th edition, or subscribe if you haven't already. With all that said, I am Aaron Dershado, and I will see you all next time, chummer.